In episode 5, James and I discuss the role of recruiters in your job search. What are the different types of recruiters? What are their motivations? And how are we going to engage with them to maximise our opportunities? James and I have worked in all different types of recruitments, so in this episode we can really give you the insights on all of these roles and help you find your next job. Enjoy! The job market has changed since the pandemic, and so have the rules.
What worked 3 years ago no longer works. There's so much more noise out there and so much contradictory advice.
We're here to help you cut past the noise and decode the new rules.
And to guide you to your next opportunity. We're going to give you our shared expertise and help you figure out how to make the most of this post-pandemic talent market.
So join us on this journey if you're open to work. Hey James.
Hi Matt.
We're back. Episode 5 of Open to Work. What is the Open to Work podcast? If you're a first-time listener, tell them what they're in for.
We decided to make this podcast because the post-pandemic job market is really difficult to navigate. You and I have spent our careers running talent acquisition teams at small companies and large, and we felt we had useful information to share to help folks figure out how to navigate the signal to noise, which is the biggest symptom of this crazy job market.
And so we're going to bring out episodes every week for 10 weeks. You know, everything from how to build your LinkedIn profile, which I think we did at the start of the series. We're going to be going through negotiation. And today we're going to be talking about recruiters. But before we get into that, we're both open to work. That's part of we're seeing this from having been on both sides of the aisle, I think. And that's what kind of makes this what it is. How is your job search going?
So I flew down to Los Angeles a week or so ago for a series of final interviews for a job I'm really interested in and a company I'm really interested in. And now I'm in that awful period where I just have to wait to see what happens. At this point, I've done everything I can do. I've done my best. And now I just have to wait and see. And it's an exercise in resilience, but really the whole job search process is an exercise in resilience because some days are good and you feel optimistic and some days are really, really tough. It's another reason that we wanted to put this podcast out there is to really help people navigate what can be a difficult and lengthy and often quite an isolating process. There are hundreds of thousands, millions of people, in fact, looking for work. So you're definitely not alone. No matter where you are in your career, everybody is going through the same thing. And so it's really interesting to be recording this whilst I'm also going through this myself, you know? And you too are going through the same thing. So
yeah, I mean, just before we started recording, I was kind of talking about how exhausted I was, to be honest, about going out, starting a new job process. I don't know how to describe it, but the closest thing I could kind of say, it's like having a weighted blanket on you or weight on your shoulder the entire time, or just a pressure on your chest the entire time, that even when you're having a good moment, you sort of know that good moment is going to end soon and you're going to have to sit back at your desk on Monday when your partner goes to work and go, what the hell am I going to do now? I still don't have a job. And I think that is really, really stressful.
But I really believe in putting good energy out into the universe. And hopefully what we're doing here is helping people that are going through the same thing. And we're putting out into the universe more of the energy that we want to see back, you know?
James, tell us about our American sponsor.
Many of the legacy ATS products don't use AI in any meaningful way, which is what is so innovative about MojoHire.ai. It is an overlay that you can add to your existing ATS that helps you better discover candidates that are already there and reduces discovery time by up to 90%. Their comparative AI tool is a real game changer, and you can learn more at mojohire.ai.
Today we're talking about the role of a recruiter. So we both grew up being individual contributor recruiters. It's maybe been a little bit longer for you than it has been for me since you've been on the phone speaking with candidates. But why don't you start with just talking about the role of a recruiter in your job search?
Yes, and thank you for the constant reminders every episode that I
You
am
bring it
older
up
than you.
you bring it up yourself most of the time. So now I just feel like it's a running theme that I now had to find a way to bring it in.
I was answering a question about this on LinkedIn yesterday, and someone said, a genuine question, before email and before the internet, how did you send resumes? And like all us old recruiters were like, oh, we put them in the mail. Or when I started, we used to fax them. And I was like, yeah, we used to fax resumes. But anyway, I digress. I think this is a really important topic because folks are often, there's often a lot of confusion around what a recruiter does versus what a recruiter doesn't do. So I think it's useful for us to explain the three main categories of recruiters, and then also explain how each of those main groups interact with the job search process. There's tons of talking points on LinkedIn and other social media about recruiters being bad or recruiters being useless. I should say I'm not going to blindly defend the profession, of course, because like any industry, there's the good, the bad, and the indifferent. But I do think that a lot of the anger is as a result of not fully understanding the role recruiters play. A good place to start is by understanding where recruiters fit into your job search.
Yeah, I mean, someone once said to me, a good recruiter is like a good real estate agent, in that once you find, they can change your life, and once you find one, you never let them go.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy, especially because one of the groups of recruiters work on the same model, i.e. they don't get paid unless you find a job, or unless the job gets filled, I should say, in the same way that a real estate agent doesn't get paid unless they sell the house. Let's do the three main groups. By far, the largest constituency of recruiters are in-house recruiters, and that's where both you and I have spent the bulk of our career. I think both of us actually started our career on the other side of the desk as third-party external recruiters working for agencies or search firms. And then there's a subset of third-party recruiters that just handle executive search. Let's start with executive search because it's the smallest group. The clue is in the name.
My career.
Yeah, same. Here in the United States, typically speaking, an executive search recruiter only works on jobs with a base salary of $250,000 or higher. Executive search is always paid for by the company looking to fill the job. And unlike the other type of third-party recruiting, the fee is paid upfront. It's typically a third of the first year's total compensation. So in America, for an executive, the total compensation is typically base salary, bonus, and stock. There's always a small percentage of roles that need to go out to external search, even though it's violently expensive. And the reasons for that are typically, there's two major reasons. The first reason is that you want to replace an executive that's currently in seat and that they don't know that they're about to lose their job. So you need a search firm to do the work clandestinely and make everybody in the process sign an NDA, which is the really ugly side of it, obviously. The other major reason is if the executive you're looking to hire is for a new division or a new category or a new line of business, that you don't want your competitive set to find out that you're moving into that space. So a great example, back in the day, when I was working at Net-a-Porter, when we were launching Mr. Porter, our menswear business, we did some external executive search so that we could have everyone in the process sign NDAs, because we didn't want the fashion industry knowing that we were moving into menswear, for example.
We often looked out for searches that were country launches. So predominantly we would be hiring someone's first leader on ground for a region, either across Europe or Australia. Now, Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all.
Do you want to talk about contingency recruiting?
Contingency recruiting is where basically they are paid purely on success. So they're likely to have a higher volume of roles that they're working on at any given time, but they're taking anywhere between 12 on the app, or probably on the lowest end, and but somewhere likely between 15 and 20% of your salary or as a volume. And so I think that that's probably, especially not having it exclusively means that 3 or 4 agencies could post the same job ad, speak about the exact same role, and could muddy potentially the perception of what's happening. But I have always gone down the route of exclusivity and where possible kind of retained, because I think it drives the best results out of the recruiting out of the agencies that you're partnering with. But most businesses and lots of businesses don't do it like that.
And it's actually it's a little bit rarer over here in the US. Executive search is the same everywhere: Asia, Europe, here in the United States. The contingency agency recruiting model exists here, but it's nowhere near as developed as it is in the UK and Europe. Typically here, and that's why the largest constituent of recruiters are actually in-house recruiters. Mm-hmm. Once a company gets to a scale where they're hiring multiple people every year, it's always cheaper to have an internal recruiting team, which is why there are more internal recruiters than there are of any other sort.
Functionally, the role, I guess, is to brief a client, of the internal client, on what they're looking for, manage the flow of candidates through the process, ensure that the process is being managed compliantly, and in some respects, they're also proactively reaching out to the candidate. And broadly speaking, the idea is recruiters should be managing and giving a great process to both the client and the candidate. That's about as succinct a summary as I could think of. What would you add to that?
I think I would start by saying that internal recruiting is a really difficult job, juggling 3 competing groups of stakeholders. And so it's a tough job being a recruiter. You've got to keep your candidates happy and informed. You've got to keep all of the processes moving. You've got to understand what your hiring manager wants. You've got to keep your HR business partner informed. And you've got to motivate all of the folks on the panel to be available for their interviews, to show up for their interviews, to give their feedback for the interviews. There's a lot of competing priorities. And in markets like this, where recruiting teams get disproportionately impacted by layoffs, there are fewer people in seat. There are fewer experienced people in seat because experienced people are more expensive. And so what tends to happen, and what we're seeing at scale, is that you end up with more junior recruiters carrying a heavier rec load. So it's just more stuff to manage with less guidance. And that's why things, I think, are starting to slip through the cracks and why folks are having suboptimal experiences.
There's also a reality where those 3 groups of hiring managers, interviewers, and HR often have actively conflicting ideas of what this role needs to look like to be successful in the business, and also what sort of persona, what sort of candidate will be successful here. And that is kind of, the recruiter may not, hopefully is aware of all of those different often conflicting concepts, but also may actively not be informed, which I think adds to like the challenges that they might have in managing the process, but also making sure that you as the candidate, here's back something, when you're not getting feedback from a recruiter, it's almost certainly not because they've been given feedback that's positive and they don't want to give it to you. It's because they're sitting there waiting, and they've probably been chasing in between all of their other jobs hiring managers to tell them what they thought of you. and that they've been waiting 3 or 4 days, and that's what's causing the delay. And I think that getting everyone in a room and saying, what did you think of James, as I think you're experiencing at the moment, could take a week. Just that one conversation, and it's and I think that's again what's causing a lot of the frustration is how stretched and managing these processes, which in order to do it right can take time.
I think a big fundamental disconnect in the process is candidates believe that recruiters are there to find them a job, and that's not what recruiters are there to do. Recruiters are there to ensure that jobs get filled, and that might sound like two sides of the same coin, but it isn't. Like, recruiters are primarily responsible to hiring managers and to HR business partners and to the internal recruiting team. That's who tells them what to do. And candidates are a critical constituent in that process. But recruiters' ultimate job is to the successful candidate, of which there's only ever one. And so there might be 5 candidates in the process. The recruiter is going to be with you only as far as you stay in the process. If you get selected out, then you're no longer the recruiter's concern, which sounds brutal, but that is the reality of how the process works.
And I think a lot of recruiters will kind of comment or write in or have a perspective. It's like, no, I kind of keep in touch with my candidates all the way through, and even if they're not successful, for the future. And that's very, very possible. If you have a recruiter that you've interacted with, what's the best way to work with a recruiter, I guess, now that you kind of armed with this information that they're not necessarily representing you as a candidate? So as a result, how do we engage with recruiters? What's important to know and understand as we start to engage with either an agency recruiter or an in-house recruiter?
I think it's important to, first of all, have that paradigm shift in your mind that because you're never paying for the services of a recruiter, right? The recruiter is always paid for either it's always paid for by the company one way or another, either because they're on the company's payroll or because they're paying the agency fee. The services a recruiter provides to you are always free at the point of consumption. You're not the customer, so you're not paying for the service. So that should have a bearing on your expectations of what that's going to look like. I think it's the first important thing to remember. Look for opportunity. Look for jobs that are interesting to you. And all those jobs come with a recruiter attached. Like, once you are a candidate in the process, the recruiter will be working with you for good, better, or worse. And over the course of your career, you're going to experience great recruiters and bad recruiters and indifferent recruiters. And the great recruiters that you work with, you will end up forming long-term relationships with over your career, even if you're unsuccessful in a process or a couple of processes, because you will have built a rapport with that person and you will end up working together again in the future.
Like, when I go into that first call with a recruiter then, or when I'm first interacting with a recruiter, what's some things that I should bear in mind? Because I think the first interaction you're going to have with a role is with a recruiter.
The recruiter is the representative of the organization. So you should be as prepared for meeting with the recruiter as you would with the hiring manager, because they are going to be deciding whether you're going to go any further in the process. And like preparing for any other interview, you need to have done your research and be ready for that conversation, but also be prepared to ask the recruiter questions, because this is also the decision point for you on whether you want to go any further in the process. It's a two-way thing, and establishing that rapport with the recruiter from the get-go is a really good jumping off point, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And then in those conversations, they often have a kind of core list of requirements that they need. Like, what are the absolute must-haves that they're looking for? And they're often screening against maybe 2 or 3 topics. But so being prepared for those topics, because they can definitely screen you out. So if you are not prepared, then prepare to fail, because a good recruiter is being tasked with narrowing down very efficiently and effectively exactly what they're looking for, and making sure there's a very high success rate of you entering into the process and then completing the process. Like, that's what the best recruiters out there will be doing. But then also they're going through the kind of must-have questions around, like, salary expectations, your notice period, all that sort of jazz. Being prepared to being prepared to ask questions and clarify the compensation position, and come away from that conversation with an equal understanding of what the comp package is that's on offer, but then also what it is that you're looking for, and making sure that everyone's on the same page as that. This is a critical part of that conversation, because what you don't want to happen is, if you miss that conversation, to then get to the end of the process and then go, we weren't aligned from the start. And that does happen. And so make sure that you 100% have had that conversation, you're all on the same page, and you're ready to move forward.
Yes, 1,000,000%. The biggest reason deals go south is around misalignment on pay and rations. How much time is expected in the office? Is it remote? Is it hybrid? What is it? Mm-hmm. What are the pay? What are the benefits? And it is critical that you have a really transparent conversation with the recruiter. The recruiter is on your side. The recruiter is not there to minimize the cost of the hire. That is actually the opposite of what the recruiter is trying to do. Recruiters are always trying to push for the maximum salary possible, because we stand more chance of closing the job if the candidate accepts. So always be really transparent from the get-go with the recruiter about what your expectations are.
And I love that point that they're on your side. I talk about interview and assessment processes quite a lot, and really, like, they want, hopefully a good recruiter will be kind of making sure that you're well prepared and you know exactly what you're looking at, you're getting yourself in for. Ask them questions and ask for their help. Like, it's not a sign of weakness or lack of understanding of the process. Like, they're there to be a guide for you in the best possible way to help you get that job. And the best executives, really, that I've ever worked with have all the way through from SDRs actually, and candidates, all the way through to executives, have always asked for help from their recruiter. Can I get 50 minutes of your time to help prepare for this? I just want to get an understanding of what they're looking for. Like, ask your recruiter, and either if they're an agency or if they're in-house, both of them are actively incentivized, if you're a candidate moving through a process, to ensure that you're well prepared and know what you're walking into. You mentioned we need to understand what they do and what they don't do. What is it that you think, if there is any misalignment, of what recruiters don't do?
Recruiters are not career coaches, and they're not there to find you a job. And so one of the biggest disconnects is when candidates find a recruiter at a company that they want to work for, and they reach out to that recruiter and say, hey, I want to work at Apple. Do you have any jobs for me? That message will almost certainly be ignored, because that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the recruiter is there to do. A recruiter is not there to look at your background and then go searching around the company to find a fit. That's not how it works.
If you're starting your job search and your sole way of going to market is, I'm going to reach out to my recruiters that I've worked with, or my agency recruiters, you're also doing yourself a disservice. As we've mentioned, they are not there to serve you necessarily as an individual candidate. They're there to serve a client. And if you happen to match with that service of the client, then they will interact with you and be in touch. But they are one of the pools that you should be looking at as a candidate, not the only pool that you should be looking at. And if we think of, and even especially at now, in the context of this market, we've kind of both have agreed that probably less than 5% of roles right now are going out to an agency. And so ensuring that we're continuing to do the other things like LinkedIn research and stuff like that, and LinkedIn approaches and networking and job applications are still predominantly where you're most likely to find your next opportunity.
I think it's important for folks to understand that for internal recruiters, they are incentivized a number of different ways. There's some core metrics that we look at, such as the number of roles that they're carrying, the number of roles that they fill, the time it takes them to fill those roles, the cost per hire associated with filling those roles. One of the key metrics is offer acceptance rate. So of every 10 offers, how many of those get accepted? So there's lots of things that recruiters are measured on. Another key thing that recruiters are measured on is the source for how they fill jobs. And what I mean by that is at the end of every year, we as recruiting leaders look at how, of all the jobs that we've filled inside the company, how did those jobs get filled? And typically, over the course of a year, across the enterprise as a whole, year over year, it broadly looks the same, that 50% of roles are filled by folks applying to jobs, 30% of jobs are filled by folks being referred by existing employees, and 20% are filled by recruiters going out and proactively sourcing candidates. Now, that shifts across the enterprise. Some parts of the enterprise, it's 100% inbound, and some parts of the enterprise, specifically tech and highly specialized roles, are 100% sourced. That means for every job in that business unit that's filled, it's because recruiters inside the company have been proactively reaching out to candidates that are working elsewhere to say, hey, would you be interested in coming and working here? The other interesting thing to bear in mind is that the primary tool for doing that is LinkedIn InMails. And across LinkedIn as a whole, and remember there are 1 billion people that use LinkedIn, the average response rate for InMails from recruiters is 30%. So 7 out of every 10 InMails that a recruiter sends goes unanswered. And of the 30%, of the 3 in 10 that get answered, that 30% includes people responding to say they're not interested. So as a candidate, if a recruiter reaches out to you, first of all, respond, because that puts you in the 30th percentile, even if it's just to say you're not interested. But remember, recruiters are like everybody else, and they change jobs every 3 to 4 years. So you don't know where that recruiter is going to be working in the future. So I always say, and especially in an economy like this one, if a recruiter reaches out to you for a job that you're not interested in, you almost certainly know somebody that is looking for work. So respond to the recruiter, let them know that you're not interested, and connect them with someone that you think has a similar background to you that might be interested, because you are putting good energy out into the universe. You are potentially helping connect somebody with opportunity, but also you're potentially starting to build a long-term relationship with a recruiter that may be useful for you in 3 years' time or 5 years' time.
I think it's a really nice sentiment to end on. There's recruiters can be an amazing asset to us, and especially we go back to that farming analogy. If you are not looking for work, this is a time where you farm really, really good relationships, and put, as you say, put good energy out there, refer other people, build good relationships with recruiters, especially if you're not looking, so that when the time comes that you are actively looking, then you have these really strong pre-built relationships with people who know who you are, who are willing to advocate for you, or potentially could be in another business that now is super interesting and hiring at a great scale. So treat your recruiters well, because they could very well be the people that end up getting you the job. And if you're in a process, hopefully they're supporting you through that process and are fully incentivized for you to get that job as well. So we're here every week. Please remember to kind of like and subscribe and give us a review wherever you get your podcasts. We're on a mission to really help as many people as possible. And so whenever you share this with someone, if you think that they're looking for a job or thinking about looking for a job, then this podcast could potentially help them on that journey, and hopefully it's helping you on that journey. So please, we want to help, and that's what this podcast is here for.
We really do want to help. You are not in this alone.
So James, as per usual, where can we find you this week?
On LinkedIn. Always find me on LinkedIn. You can now find me on TikTok, which is very new.
What's your TikTok handle?
James Hudson Knows Talent.
Okay, well, I guess you could be the judge, listener.
I'm just experimenting, and every week you can find me on Wednesday in my column in Forbes. So a real spectrum there, really, from TikTok to Forbes via LinkedIn.
Yeah, new media to old media via a podcast, and potentially with some long form LinkedIn written in as well. And as always, you can find me also on LinkedIn. Not really on TikTok yet, and you can find me on MatthewParkerAdvisory.com. And you can also contact us on opentoworkpod@gmail.com. And this has been a really comprehensive episode on recruiters, and I'm sure there's loads of recruiters who are going to listen to this. So write in, tell us what you think. Have we got it right? Have we said things that you don't agree with? We want to hear. So look forward to hearing from you all. And until next time, thanks very much.
See you soon.